There is a quiet space that exists between words. It's not something most people notice. It doesn't announce itself. It simply waits patiently for those moments when the world grows a little too loud and the heart feels a little too full. In that space, nothing is demanded of you. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to perform strength or pretend clarity. You are simply there, breathing, listening, existing. Many pass through life without ever pausing long enough to feel it. They fill every silence quickly, as if stillness were something to be feared. Yet silence is not empty, it is honest. It reflects back what we often avoid when noise distracts us. There are times when words feel insufficient, when emotions rise but language falls short. In those moments, silence becomes a mirror. It shows us not who we want to be seen as, but who we are when no one is watching. This is where the story begins, not with conflict, not with triumph, but with a quiet awareness, a subtle noticing of the weight carried inside, the unspoken thoughts, the restrained reactions, the things left unsaid because saying them might cost more than keeping them. They often misunderstand silence. They mistake it for weakness, for indifference, for surrender, but silence has its own gravity. It asks for patience. It requires courage. And it holds a kind of power that loudness can never reach. In this quiet space, the heart listens more closely. Old feelings surface gently. Memories drift in without warning, not to overwhelm, but to be acknowledged. Silence does not rush healing. It allows it. There is something deeply human about this moment, about standing still internally, even as the world moves quickly around you, about choosing not to fill the air with explanations or defenses, about trusting that not everything needs to be clarified immediately, or at all. Silence teaches us that reaction is easy. Presence is not. Anyone can speak when emotions flare. Few can remain grounded when misunderstood, and yet it is here, in this unguarded stillness, that self-respect quietly takes root. Not the kind that demands recognition, not the kind that argues its worth. But the kind that simply knows. The quiet space between words is where boundaries begin to form without confrontation, where emotional discipline is born, not from suppression, but from understanding, from the realization that your inner world deserves protection, not constant exposure. This is not about withdrawing from life. It is about choosing where your energy belongs. When you pause here, even briefly, you may notice something unexpected, a sense of calm that does not depend on outcomes, a steadiness that doesn't rise or fall with approval, a quiet reassurance that you are allowed to exist without justification. Silence, in this way, becomes a companion, not an absence but a presence, one that walks beside you gently, reminding you that strength does not always speak first, and sometimes it does not speak at all. There comes a time when silence no longer feels peaceful. It begins to feel heavy, like a room where the air has stopped moving. This is the part few speak about, the moment when holding everything inside starts to ache, when emotions press gently but persistently against the chest, asking to be felt, yet finding no place to go. You may sit quietly, appearing composed, while inside something trembles. A thought repeats itself. A feeling circles without rest. The silence that once felt protective now feels uncertain, as though it might collapse under the weight of what remains unspoken. They do not see this part. They see calm on the surface. They assume ease. But inner discomfort does not announce itself. It hides behind measured responses and controlled expressions. It learns to survive without witnesses. In this silence, questions begin to form, slow and searching. Why does this stay with me? Why does it matter so deeply? Why is it so difficult to release? There is no immediate answer, only the quiet persistence of emotion. waiting to be acknowledged rather than resolved. Emotional discipline is often misunderstood. It is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of awareness. And awareness, at first, can be uncomfortable. It brings you face to face with the parts of yourself that react, that long to explain, that wish to be understood immediately. The urge to speak grows stronger here. To correct, br to justify, br to reach outward for relief. Yet something holds you back, not fear, but instinct. A subtle knowing that reacting too quickly would cost you something you cannot afford to lose. Br so the silence remains, and with it, the discomfort. This is where growth often begins, quietly and without ceremony, not in clarity, but in confusion, not in confidence, but in restraint. There is a strange vulnerability in not reacting. It leaves you exposed to misunderstanding. It asks you to tolerate the discomfort of being unseen. And that is no small thing. The heart resists this at first. It tightens, it searches for escape. But over time, something shifts. The discomfort softens just slightly, enough to breathe. You begin to notice that emotions, when not fed by reaction, start to change shape. They move more slowly. They lose some of their sharpness. What once demanded immediate release now asks only for acknowledgement. This is not suppression, this is patience, br. Silence here becomes a holding space, a place where feelings are allowed to exist without judgment or performance, where nothing needs to be proven. They may continue to misunderstand. They may interpret your quiet as distance, br, or assume there is nothing happening at all. But inside, a deeper dialogue unfolds, one that does not rely on explanation, one that listens instead of argues. In this quiet discomfort, you learn something essential. Not every emotion needs an audience. Not every truth needs to be spoken aloud to remain valid. The silence does not remove the feeling, but it teaches you how to sit with it without being consumed. And in doing so, it begins to change you. Not dramatically, not visibly, but steadily. What once felt like pressure becomes presence. What once felt unbearable becomes manageable. And within that stillness, a quiet resilience begins to take form, unspoken, unobserved, yet undeniably real. This is the silence that tests you, and prepares you. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being seen yet not understood, from standing in plain view while the deeper parts of you remain unnoticed. They look at what is visible. They listen only to what is said aloud, br, and from that limited distance, they begin to form conclusions. Silence leaves space for interpretation, and often that space is filled carelessly. They may assume your quiet means agreement, or that restraint is indifference, or that composure signals an absence of feeling. What they do not see is the inner effort it takes to remain still. The thoughts carefully set aside, the words deliberately held back, the emotional discipline that chooses peace over explanation. To be misunderstood in this way is disorienting. It creates a quiet ache, not loud enough to demand attention, yet persistent enough to linger. You begin to wonder if speaking would change anything at all. The mind replays moments, conversations that never happened, responses that remained internal. You imagine how things might sound if spoken differently, softer, clearer, or more forceful, and still silence remains. They may continue on, unaware, unchanged by what they never noticed. This is where self-doubt often enters gently, not as a loud accusation, but as a subtle question. Am I invisible? Does my restraint erase my presence? The temptation to explain yourself grows here, to offer clarity where assumptions have formed, to step forward and correct the story being told in your absence. But explanation does not always lead to understanding. Sometimes it only deepens the divide. Being misunderstood teaches a difficult lesson, that clarity does not guarantee connection, and being heard does not always mean being understood. There is a quiet grief in this realization, a mourning of the hope that restraint would be recognized for what it is. That silence would be interpreted as strength, not absence. Yet something steadier begins to form beneath the disappointment. An awareness that your inner life does not lose its value simply because it is unseen. They may never know the depth of your consideration. They may never feel the weight of what you chose not to say, and slowly you begin to see that their understanding is not required for your self-respect to remain intact. This is not resignation, it is discernment. You learn that explaining yourself repeatedly can become a form of self-abandonment, that constantly correcting perceptions can quietly erode your peace. Silence in this context becomes a boundary, not a wall, but a line that says, I do not owe my inner world to every interpretation. The misunderstanding still hurts, but it no longer defines you. You begin to stand more comfortably in your quiet, not because it is easy, but because it is honest, because it aligns with something deeper than approval. They continue to see only what they are prepared to see, and that, you come to realize, was never within your control. What is within your control is how deeply you root yourself in what you know to be true. And in that rootedness, something unexpected appears, a sense of dignity that not ask to be validated. Being misunderstood no longer feels like an accusation. It feels like a moment of separation, a reminder that not everyone walks at the same depth. And so you remain where you are, quiet, present, intact, knowing that your worth does not diminish in the absence of recognition. Sometimes, being misunderstood is simply the cost of remaining true to yourself. There comes a moment when the noise outside no longer holds your attention, not because it has stopped, but because something quieter has begun to speak within you. It happens slowly, almost without notice. A subtle turning inward, away from the need to be seen correctly and toward the need to understand yourself more clearly. At first, this inward movement feels unfamiliar. Without the constant focus on how things appear, there is space, and space can feel unsettling. Yet in that space, a deeper awareness begins to form. You start to recognize patterns, not in others, but in yourself. The moments that trigger a response, the familiar tightening before a reaction, the urge to defend, to explain, to restore balance by being understood. And for the first time, instead of acting on those impulses, you observe them. This observation is gentle. There is no judgment here, only curiosity. You begin to ask quieter questions, not who is right, but why does this matter to me? In this stillness, a realization begins to take shape. It is not sudden or dramatic. It arrives softly, like a truth that has been waiting patiently. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every feeling needs expression to be valid. Not every moment of discomfort signals a need for action. You begin to see that reaction is often driven by a desire to relieve inner tension, not by the necessity of truth. That many responses are attempts to be free from discomfort rather than acts of clarity. They may still misunderstand. They may still interpret silence as absence. But your focus has shifted. The weight of their perception feels lighter now, not because it no longer exists, but because it no longer sits at the center of your awareness. This is the turning point, the quiet moment when you recognize that your energy is finite, and not every situation deserves access to it. You begin to understand the difference between being honest and being reactive, between expression that heals and expression that merely releases pressure. In this inward turning, self-respect becomes clearer. It is no longer tied to being acknowledged or agreed with. It becomes something internal, a relationship with yourself. You realize that the urge to explain often comes from a place of fear of being misjudged, dismissed, or reduced. But fear does not need to lead the way. Silence, when chosen consciously, becomes an act of alignment, a decision to stay grounded in what you know rather than what you fear. This realization brings relief, a soft exhale you didn't realize you were holding. There is freedom in knowing that you are allowed to let moments pass without engagement. You do not become indifferent. You become selective. The inner world grows quieter, not because emotions have disappeared, but because they are no longer fighting for control. They are being heard, privately, fully. They remain in the background now. Their assumptions no longer pull you outward. You no longer feel compelled to meet every expectation or challenge every misunderstanding. Instead, you listen inwardly. You trust your sense of timing. You allow understanding to unfold at its own pace. This is where inner power begins, not as force, but as steadiness, a calm awareness that does not rush to assert itself. The turning inward does not separate you from the world. It simply roots you more deeply within yourself. And from that place, silence is no longer something you endure. It becomes something you choose. There is a moment, subtle but decisive, when silence stops being accidental and becomes intentional, not imposed by circumstance, but chosen with clarity. You feel it when a familiar trigger appears, a remark, a glance, an assumption, and the old reflex begins to rise. The urge to respond forms almost automatically, shaped by habit and memory. Words gather at the edge of your mind, ready to be released. .br, and then something pauses. .br. It is not hesitation born of fear. It is awareness. A quiet recognition that not every invitation deserves acceptance. .br. They may exp. ECT, a response. .dr. They may anticipate correction or defense. They may even rely on your reaction to confirm their narrative. .dr. But this time you choose differently. Choosing not to answer is not silence born of weakness. It is silence rooted in discernment. A deliberate act of self-respect that values inner balance over immediate relief. The absence of reaction can feel uncomfortable at first. There is a strange vulnerability in letting a moment pass untouched, in allowing misunderstanding to exist without interference. .br. Yet within that discomfort, a new strength begins to settle. You begin to notice how quickly emotions shift when they are not given momentum. How the intensity fades when it is not reinforced by words. Reaction feeds reaction. Silence starves it. This is not avoidance. This is restraint. .br. Restraint asks more of you than reaction ever could. It requires you to sit with the feeling rather than release it, to trust that you can hold it without being overwhelmed. They may fill the silence themselves. They may project meaning where none was given. They may mistake your quiet for retreat, but the truth remains internal, steady, and unchanged. Each time you choose silence over reaction, something strengthens within you. A sense of agency returns. You are no longer moved automatically by external cues. You are choosing your responses, or choosing not to respond at all. There is a dignity in this choice, not because it is superior, but because it is aligned. You are acting in accordance with your values, not your impulses. Silence becomes a filter. It allows you to see which moments are worth engagement and which are not. It reveals patterns you may have missed before, how often reaction is expected, how rarely it is necessary. You begin to sense the quiet confidence that comes from not needing to be understood immediately, or at all. This confidence does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It simply exists, grounded and unshaken. The world does not change because of your silence. .br, but your relationship to it does. What once felt like pressure now feels optional. What once demanded response now passes through without disturbance. Choosing silence creates space, not emptiness but clarity, space to observe, to reflect, to remain centered. They continue to act as they always have. The difference is no longer theirs to influence. It is yours to protect. In this restraint, you reclaim something essential, your emotional sovereignty. the understanding that you are not obligated to respond to every provocation. Br, and in that understanding, peace quietly deepens. Silence becomes a place you can return to, not to hide, but to remain whole. There is a kind of strength that does not reveal itself quickly. It does not arrive with certainty or confidence. It grows quietly, in the moments where nothing is said and much is held. This strength forms in restraint, in the steady choice to remain grounded when reactio. N would be easier. Each time you choose stillness, something within you adjusts, subtly but permanently. You begin to notice it in small ways. A situation that once unsettled you now passes without disturbance. A comment that once demanded explanation no longer pulls you outward. The emotional waves still come, but they no longer knock you off balance. They may not notice this change. They are often attuned to noise, not depth. Br, but you feel it. A calm certainty that does not depend on circumstances. A sense of inner alignment that holds even when the outside world remains unchanged. Dr. This is growth through restraint, not the kind that draws attention, but the kind that reshapes you from the inside. You learn that power does not need to announce itself. It does not need permission or acknowledgement. It simply exists. Steady, quiet, unyielding. Restraint teaches you where your true limits are. Not the limits of endurance, but the boundaries of what you allow to affect you. You begin to see that much of what once felt overwhelming was never truly yours to carry. By choosing silence, you give yourself space to respond rather than react or to not respond at all. You are no longer pulled into every emotional current. You stand on your own ground. This does not make you distant. It makes you deliberate. Your presence becomes calmer. Your words, when you choose to speak, carry more weight because they are no longer scattered. They are intentional. They may interpret your quiet as detachment. They may mistake your composure for indifference. But indifference is empty. This strength is full. It is full of awareness, full of patience, full of understanding that not everything requires your participation. You begin to trust yourself more deeply, not because you control outcomes, but because you can regulate your inner world regardless of them. This trust creates a quiet confidence, not the kind that asserts itself, but the kind that rests easily in its own presence. Restraint changes how you move through the world. You listen more, you observe more, you speak less, but with greater clarity. You no longer feel compelled to correct every misunderstanding. You understand now that being right is not the same as being at peace. The strength that grows here is steady. It does not spike or fade. It does not rely on external validation. It remains even in moments of uncertainty. Silence becomes a foundation, not something you lean on out of necessity, but something you stand on by choice. They may continue as they always have. The difference is that their behavior no longer dictates your inner state. This is power that does not compete. Power that does not persuade. Power that does not react. It is simply there, grounded, quiet, and unshaken. And over time, you realize that this strength was never something you had to acquire. It was something you uncovered by choosing restraint when reaction was offered. As time SSEs. The world does not grow quieter, but you do. The noise continues. Opinions, assumptions, expectations, all moving with the same urgency as before. Yet your relationship to that noise has changed. You no longer feel pulled toward it. You move alongside it, untouched. This is what it means to walk without noise. Your steps are not hurried. Your presence is not announced. You do not seek to be noticed. And yet, there is a calm clarity in the way you move through each moment. Silence has become familiar now. Not something you brace against, but something that accompanies you. It follows you into conversations, into decisions, into pauses between thoughts. They may still speak loudly. They may still project certainty. They may still expect reaction. You remain steady. You notice how much energy is saved when you stop responding to everything, how light the inner world feels when it is no longer crowded with explanations. Your attention turns inward more often, not in withdrawal, but in alignment. You check in with yourself before engaging. You listen for what feels true, not what feels urgent. Walking without noise does not mean you have nothing to say. It means you are no longer compelled to say everything. Your words become fewer but more grounded. When you do speak, it is from presence rather than impulse, from clarity rather than tension. This changes the pace of life. Moments stretch slightly longer. Decisions feel less rushed, even silence between. Words begins to carry meaning. They may find this unsettling, but they may fill the space with their own interpretations, but you are no longer responsible for what others place into the quiet. There is a quiet confidence in knowing when to remain still, in understanding that not every silence needs to be broken, and not every moment needs resolution. You begin to move through situations with a sense of ease, not because they are easier, but because you are no longer fighting them internally. Walking without noise allows you to observe without absorbing, to witness without becoming entangled. This is not detachment. It is discernment. You choose where to place your attention. You choose which moments deserve your energy, and in doing so, you preserve something essential. Silence now feels spacious rather than heavy. It leaves room for thought, for reflection, for quiet understanding. The world continues to speak. You continue to listen, but you no longer feel the need to answer everything you hear. There is dignity in this restraint, a gentle authority that does not impose itself, a presence that does not need to be affirmed. Walking without noise means trusting that your worth is not measured by volume, that your presence does not require constant expression. You move forward, grounded and attentive, carrying your quiet with you, not as a shield, but as a steady companion. And in this way, life begins to feel less like a reaction and more like a choice. A calm that settles when nothing more needs to be proven, not because every question has been answered, but because the need for answers has softened. You arrive here gradually, almost without noticing. One day the quiet no longer feels like something you maintain. It simply exists, steady and unforced. Imperfection rests easily now, not as a flaw to correct, but as a truth you no longer resist. You understand that completeness was never about being understood by all or reacting correctly every time. It was about staying present with yourself. They may still hold their versions of you. They may still misunderstand the silences you chose, but their interpretations no longer disturb the stillness you carry. You have learned that peace does not come from controlling how you are perceived. It comes from releasing the need to manage it at all. The quiet you walk with now is not empty. It is filled with self-trust, with the knowledge that you can face moments as they are without needing to reshape them immediately. You no longer measure your worth by how often you speak or how clearly you are seen. You measure it by how deeply you remain aligned with yourself. There is a gentleness here toward your own limits, toward the moments when restraint felt difficult, toward the imperfections you once tried to hide or fix. Silence has taught you compassion, not only for others but for yourself. You understand now that strength does not require hardness. That emotional discipline does not mean emotional distance. It means knowing when to hold and when to let go. The world continues to move as it always has. They continue to interpret, assume, and speak. And you remain present, grounded, intact. There is no need to announce this state, no need to define it. It is not something you perform, it is something you live. You feel a quiet confidence in being unfinished, in knowing that growth does not require constant motion. That stillness, too, is a form of becoming. Nothing here is loud. Nothing here is urgent. There is only a steady awareness of your breath, your boundaries, your inner rhythm. You have learned when silence is protective, and when it is simply natural, you no longer question it. You trust it. The journey does not end with resolution in the traditional sense. There is no final understanding, no closing statement. Only presence, BR, a sense of being at ease within yourself, even when the world remains uncertain, and that is enough. Here, in this quiet completeness, you do not seek to be more. You allow yourself to be exactly as you are,